Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're taking a look at Brazil today, specifically the Distrito Federal.
That's right.
Now, on average, the income per person there, it's around $3,300 a month, which is, nearly double the national average.
Yeah, that's quite high on the surface.
Okay, but let's unpack this because, well, that number, it hides a really, really extreme divide.
It really does. It's a classic case of averages masking the reality on the ground. You get this, tale of two cities almost.
Or two neighborhoods, really, within the same administrative region. It's kind of wild.
It is. And it's a powerful picture of the broader inequality you see across Brazil.
Totally. So inside this Distrito Federal, you've got Lago Sul. About 26,000 people live there.
Okay.
Average monthly income, get this, are $23,000.
Wow. $23,000.
Yeah. I mean, to give you some perspective, that's like income levels in France or the UK, maybe New Zealand.
Right, so developed country levels of income right there in the DF.
Exactly. Think about that kind of wealth existing within Brazil.
And it really highlights how these pockets, these small areas of extreme wealth, can pull up the average for the whole region.
Skews the whole picture.
Completely. While most people might be living a very different reality.
Precisely. Because, well, not too far away, geographically speaking, you have Cidade Estrutural. About 45,000 people there.
Okay, a bit bigger population-wise.
Yeah, and their average monthly income, it's a shocking $486.
Wait, 486?
Yes, you heard that right, 486.
That's incredibly low.
We're talking income levels similar to places like Yemen or Zimbabwe.
Wow, Yemen, Zimbabwe. That comparison really brings it home.
And the key thing here isn't just, the incomes are different. It's that this kind of gap, it just completely undermines any idea of equal opportunity access to basic things.
Absolutely. It's not just numbers. This translates directly into, vastly different lives, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. So stats really show it. In Lago Sul, life expectancy is over 80.
Okay.
In Estrutural, barely 73.
Big difference. 7 years.
It's huge. And internet. 90% of homes in Lago Sul have broadband.
Right.
Estrutural, just 38%.
Wow. Less than half.
And sanitation. Open sewage isn't really a thing in Lago Sul, but it affects a quarter of the people in Estrutural.
A quarter. That's basic infrastructure we're talking about.
Yeah. But, okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. There's this other economic force in Brazil that makes even Lago Sul look, not small, but...
There's something bigger.
Yeah. We're calling it Juizlândia.
Juizlândia. Okay, that's memorable. Tell me, what is that exactly? It's not a real place, right?
No, not a physical place. It's more of a metaphor, It represents the collective economic power, the wealth of Brazil's judiciary.
Ah, okay, the judges.
Exactly. Juizlândia stands for Brazil's 18,265 active judges and appellate judges.
Right. So not a huge number of people, relatively speaking.
No, tiny compared to the neighborhoods we mentioned. But economically, a powerhouse.
Okay.
The average net monthly income for someone in Juizlândia last year was $59,000.
$59,000 net.
Net. That's more than double the average in Lago Sul, which was already incredibly high.
Wow. Double Lago Sul. That's staggering. And the concentration of wealth there must be immense.
It is. Think about this. For someone in Cidade Estrutural to earn what an average judge makes in 1 month, they'd have to work for over 10 years. And save every single real.
10 years! My goodness, that just lays bare the scale of the disparity. It really puts social mobility questions into sharp focus.
Doesn't it just? And it gets even more striking. With that average income, are $59,000 a month?
Yeah.
Each member of Juizlândia earns more than double what the average American makes.
Double the U.S. average, okay.
And they're wealthier, on average, than people in Luxembourg and Liechtenstein.
2 of the richest places on earth.
Exactly. In fact, if Juizlândia was a country, its income per person would make it the second richest on the planet.
Second richest? After who?
Only Monaco. Richer than Liechtenstein, richer than Luxembourg.
That's just... It's hard to even process that level of comparative wealth within one professional group in Brazil.
It really is.
So, just to be clear for you listening, the focus here isn't necessarily saying individual judges are doing something wrong personally. It's more about the system, right? A system that seems to funnel this extraordinary wealth to one particular branch.
Exactly. That's the core issue.
Yeah.
And where does this wealth come from? Well, it goes way beyond just their base salaries.
Okay.
You might remember back in February 2024, Luis Roberto Barroso, he's the president of the Supreme Federal Court, the STF.
Nobroso.
He wrote this opinion piece, How Much is the Judiciary Worth? And his answer was basically inestimable. You can't put a price on justice.
Right. That's a common argument, isn't it? That you need a well-paid, independent judiciary for democracy to function. You need to attract top talent.
That is the argument, absolutely. But the presenter of the video we're looking at, they offer a pretty sharp counterpoint. They talk about widespread frustration with the huge costs and all the privileges the judiciary seems to have.
And you do hear stories.
Oh, yeah. It's not hard to find examples. Reports about the courts approving massive food allowances for judges or individual judges getting over 1 million arrears in 1 month because of all these accumulated benefits.
Yeah, those kinds of stories definitely catch the public eye. And they feel that perception of a disconnect, between judicial compensation and what most Brazilians are experiencing financially.
You said it. The term public servant starts to feel a bit stretched, maybe. When you hear about the Supreme Court's budget, including huge sums for, fancy food and drinks.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a comparison that really jumps out. The STF, Brazil's Supreme Court, apparently costs more each year than the entire British royal family.
More than the royals. That's quite a statistic. It really frames the scale of the spending we're talking about.
Doesn't it? Now, okay, the Supreme Court itself, while it's the top court, it isn't actually where the bulk of the really high numbers comes from, salary-wise.
Oh.
Believe it or not, the ministers on the STF, their base salaries generally stick to the constitutional limit, which is around $46,366.
Which is still a very, very good salary in Brazil.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when the average worker is making less than our $3,400 a month. But the real engine driving these massive payouts, they're called penduricalhos.
Penduricalhos, right. I've heard that term. It means extras, add-ons.
Exactly. Perks, benefits, allowances, things added on top of the salary. And this is where it gets complicated.
How so?
Because these extras often come from specific legal interpretations or historical things that built up over time. It gets blurry what's salary and what's a benefit.
Ah, and that distinction is important.
Crucial, because it allows total pay to go way beyond the official salary cap.
So these penduricalhos, they can really inflate the total earnings.
Hugely. We're talking about things like a housing allowance, $4,300 a month, even if the judge owns their own home.
Even if they own...
Yep. Then there are allowances for food, health, daycare, bonuses for time served, payouts for unused vacation leave.
Wow, it adds up.
Compensation if they take on extra duties, relocation money, even bonuses just for being on court duty.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. Most of these are classed as benefits or indemnities, not salary. Meaning they often aren't subject to income tax.
Oh, so they're tax-free on top of being substantial amounts.
Exactly. So the base pay might be capped by the Constitution.
But the actual take-home pay can soar way above that cap because of all these untaxed extras. It's like a loophole almost.
Pretty much. And the result is, well, it's quite something. In 2024 alone, there were 63,816 times.
63,000?
Yes, 63,816 instances where judges or appellate judges received over $100,000 in a single month.
Over $100K in a month. That's more than double the constitutional salary cap.
More than double.
It's very hard to square those figures with the reality for so many Brazilians, like those in Cidade Estrutural you mentioned, lacking basic sewage systems.
Absolutely. And it gets even more extreme. Just to give you a concrete example, February of last year, 2024, 10 judges and appellate judges from the Court of Justice in Rondônia.
Okay, in Rondônia.
Each one received over 1 million reais net in their bank account in 1 month.
1 million reais net each.
Each.
10 of them.
How is that even justified?
Well, when asked, the court said these payments were eventual advantages. Things like seniority bonuses that had built up, accumulated vacation pay they hadn't taken, other entitlements. And crucially, they said it was all authorized by the National Council of Justice.
So the official line is, it's technically legal, it follows the rules, it's been approved.
That's the explanation. But it really shows how these eventual advantages and these indemnifications, these extra payments, become the way that judges who by law shouldn't earn more than about $46,300
right.
can end up taking home over 1 million reais net in a single month.
It seems the system has kind of created ways to allow these huge payments, blurring that line between salary and benefits. Definitely. Now, you might think, okay, Brazil is spending so much money on its judiciary. It must be incredibly efficient, right?
You'd hope so. High cost should mean high performance, in theory.
Well, here's the surprise. Despite being the second most expensive judiciary in the world, measured as a percentage of GDP.
Second most expensive.
Wow. It's remarkably slow. Cases here take 3 to 10 times longer to resolve than they do in Europe.
3 to 10 times slower. That's a huge difference in efficiency.
It is.
Yeah.
And get this, Brazil actually has fewer judges per person than Germany does.
Fewer judges, but much higher cost and much slower.
Exactly. So it really challenges that idea that just throwing money at it or paying judges extremely well automatically leads to a better, faster system.
Yeah, clearly there are other factors dragging down efficiency despite all the money being spent. It's not just about compensation levels.
One factor seems to be this thing called legal uncertainty.
Legal uncertainty, what does that mean in practice?
Well, it's the combination of these long delays plus what some people see as judges interpreting laws differently, kind of unpredictably. It creates an environment where businesses, individuals, they just don't know where they stand legally.
Right. Unpredictability makes planning very difficult.
Massively. One study estimated that just in São Paulo state, this legal uncertainty costs businesses over $9 billion.
$9 billion, just from unclear laws and diverging court decisions.
Yep, because laws are seen as ambiguous or court decisions sometimes go against what seemed like established rules.
And that kind of uncertainty, it must harm the economy, right? Discourage investment.
You'd think so. Businesses hate unpredictability.
But what does the judiciary say about this?
Interestingly, Minister Barroso, the STF president, he reportedly dismissed these concerns. He called the idea of widespread legal uncertainty in Brazil a certain legend.
A legend, so denying it's a major problem.
Seems so. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court itself has made some decisions that, well, arguably add to this feeling of uncertainty.
Like what?
Like ruling that taxes can be collected retroactively, even if the court changes its mind on how a tax law should have been interpreted years ago.
Oh, retroactive taxes based on a later ruling. That sounds like a recipe for uncertainty.
Right. And then there was that case with Minister Toffoli. He single-handedly suspended a huge multi-billion real fine against J&F.
J&F, the Batista Brothers Company.
That's the one. And his wife's law firm was representing them.
Ah. Well, regardless of the legal merits, situations like that, they inevitably raise questions about impartiality, don't they?
They certainly fuel the perception problem, let's say.
Yeah.
And all this happens against the backdrop of that enormous budget. Our $133 billion for the judiciary in 2024.
Our $133 billion. It's hard to grasp how much money that is.
Well, let's try to put it in perspective. It's more than 60% of the entire federal health budget.
60% of health spending. Wow.
It's 20% more than the total federal spending on education.
Growth on education, too.
And it's more than the entire GDP of 6 states in the north of Brazil and 6 states in the northeast.
So more than the entire economic output of 12 states, including some of the poorest ones.
Yes. States where that money could make a massive difference. In fact, the judiciary's budget is bigger than the combined GDP of Acre, Amapá, Roraima, and Tocantins, all put together.
Putting it that way, it really underlines the sheer scale of national resources going into this one branch of government.
Now think about this. What if you cut that budget in half, say, our $66.5 billion.
Okay, half the budget.
Brazil would still have a very expensive judiciary by global standards. But with that, saved our $66.5 billion.
What could you do with it?
You could potentially build thousands of schools, equip hundreds of new hospitals, pave tens of thousands of kilometers of roads.
Wow. Tangible things that would directly help people, especially the most vulnerable we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Things that could directly tackle those deep inequalities in health, education, infrastructure.
Right. Things that could improve lives in places like Cidade Estrutural.
Precisely. But instead, a huge chunk of these funds goes to support, well, the very high salaries and the extensive perks of this relatively small group of judges.
Arguably making the inequality worse, not better.
That's the argument, yeah. The presenter we're drawing from calls it a vergonha, a disgrace, a shame, that the branch of government meant to uphold justice is itself such a source of disparity.
It's a powerful ethical point.
And it's a sensitive topic. You might remember that incident where a passenger confronted Minister Lewandowski on a plane.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
Expressing similar feelings about privileges, and they ended up facing potential legal trouble for it.
Right. It shows how high the tensions are around this, and maybe how defensive the judiciary can be about criticism.
Definitely highlights the sensitivity. So, let's circle back to Minister Barroso's point. Justice is inestimable.
Yes.
Okay, maybe the ideal of justice is priceless. But we have to ask, right, is the current system in Brazil with these extreme privileges, the high costs, the questionable efficiency, is it really serving justice for everyone?
Or has it, perhaps, become part of the problem? a driver of the very inequality it should be fighting against?
That's the uncomfortable question.
It really forces a conversation about balance. How do you ensure an independent, properly resourced judiciary, which is vital, without creating this kind of separate, privileged class, especially when public funds are so desperately needed elsewhere?
The video presenter really puts it bluntly. He asks, is our $30,000 a month not enough? Is our $46,000 not enough?
Yeah.
He reminds you, the listener, that 99% of Brazilians earn less than that, and half the population. They need to save for 3 years to make what some judges get in just 1 month.
Those comparisons are stark. They really make you think about what society considers enough or fair compensation, especially for public roles, within the context of the country's overall economic reality.
His call to action is pretty simple. Just share this information, talk about it, raise awareness about what justice actually costs in Brazil.
Because understanding the scale of it, the details we've discussed, that's got to be the first step towards any kind of meaningful discussion or potential change down the line.
Exactly.
And it leaves us, and you listening, with a really big thought to ponder. What should a truly just and equitable judicial system look like, particularly in a country with Brazil's challenges? And what would it actually take to get closer to that ideal?
Something to think about. That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.